Josh Barr got injured at the U23 World Tournament. And if Barr had to miss time, well, Penn State has a future national title contender waiting right behind him.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State Wrestling, and as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Seyko, and I am your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State Wrestling and Penn State Football. We're going to talk about the U23 World Tournament. Penn State had 7 wrestlers go out there. 1 already has a gold medal. 2 are on the brink of getting a gold medal. Another one's getting ready to medal as well, and 2 still have to go through their respective brackets. I want to talk about Lucas Cochran. Don't forget about Lucas Cochran. And Shayne Van Ness had some important news that affects him for this upcoming NCAA season. We got to begin with Josh Barr, who had to injury default at the World Tournament, and why Penn State is more than prepared, even for the worst case scenario. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Friendly reminder to let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Be a part of the conversation as we're going to address what happened here with Josh Barr. How serious is it? Is he going to be okay? And why Connor Mirasola is more than ready to go in this instance. Yes, I do mean that when I say future NCAA title contender. And that, I mean, that should be a given, right? That's the expectation here as a former top pound for pound recruit. So what happened? Josh Barr ended up getting injured. And what is the nature of his injury, actually? Well, I've heard that because it looked like, if you actually watch the match itself, when he gets hurt, it looks like he grabs for his leg. And an unfortunate circumstance, he gets injured in the middle of the match and he waves his arm trying to signal that he's hurt. Azimi of Iran, tough matchup in the quarterfinals, ends up losing by tech fall. And Barr just at the end of the match, you can tell that he's in pain, or that maybe a combination of both the frustration with the loss and the combination of the injury there at 92 kilos. So he has to injury default. He didn't continue. So from what I'm hearing so far is that it looked like a leg injury. If you watch the match, it's actually a midsection rib injury potentially. And we don't know the severity of it, but it sounds like things are okay for the moment, that this isn't going to be a long-term, extremely serious injury, but we won't have more information until he returns to the States, goes through the testing. So this is a big loss because it potentially, right? Penn State is in a great spot to be able to offset this, but Josh Barr was the runner-up at 197 a season ago, after being in a battle with Connor Mirasola and Lucas Cochran at 197. And now he becomes the favorite at 197 going into the season. So Penn State is able to allow Barr that time. Barr got hurt at the Big Ten tournament, as we saw a season ago, and he ended up being able to wrestle. He was not 100%, but Dan Monthly and this training staff, they know how to take care of the wrestlers. They know how to get them back as close to full strength as possible, or get them in a position to succeed despite an injury. So why Barr's situation doesn't raise any red flags to me here is that Penn State has the depth between Connor Mirasola, who we're going to talk about in a moment. You also have Lucas Cochran. That's why I say don't forget about him, but he has an interesting circumstance here. We'll explain what his plan is in the upcoming segment. But Barr has the time to rest. If he does have an injury here, if it's a rib injury, if he's still recovering, has any rust to shake off from the leg injury that he dealt with in the middle of the postseason, he will have the ample time to recovery. And Penn State, Cale Sanderson has said this, that he has the best training staff in the country, the best personal trainer that you could, med trainer that you could ask for in Dan Monthly. So Josh Barr will be just fine at the end of the day. But why Penn State is allowed this time, or doesn't have to worry about it as much, is because you have Connor Mirasola sitting and waiting right there. A lot of conversation this offseason about how Connor and Cole Mirasola should transfer out because there's no clear path for Connor to get in the lineup. And that is true. I believe when these two are going to be at their best, I don't think Connor's going to be a national title favorite right out of the gate, but eventually he will be. Eventually, as Connor gets more experience, gets more battle tested at folk style, because he's really good at freestyle. He just won a U20 medal, right? Took third place ultimately. But Connor Mirasola is ready to go to be a starter as long as they need him to be while Josh Barr recovers. So the blueprint, depending on the severity of it, is that you can let Barr rest all the way till January, and Connor should be able to get you those wins at 197. Let's look at the rankings right now, because 197 is a good class, but Barr is the clear-cut national title favorite, and it's really not close. You have Rocky Elam, who transfers to Iowa State, who's coming off of an injury. Okay, Elam will be back, and Elam will certainly be that projected contender. But then Joey Novak of Wyoming, Stephen Little of Little Rock, Max Stout of Pittsburgh, and Camden McDaniel of Nebraska. Those are the names that really stand out. I'll give you actually a couple others because they're ranked just inside of the top 10 according to Intermat. Justin Rademacher of Oregon State, who went on that phenomenal run at the U20 World Championships and won gold, and Cody Merrill of Oklahoma State. So freshman there, Rademacher going into a second season with Oregon State. 197 has the depth of talent, but it's not very top heavy. And when I look at Connor Mirasola going in to potentially take over for Josh Barr for an extended period of time, he could he can go toe to toe with definitely a lot of these wrestlers. I put him solidly in the top 5 to start. And by the end of the season, you could make the case that he's going to be. Penn State has the top 2 wrestlers at 197, but only one of them can start. That's the fact of the matter here. So as Connor Mirasola gets going and gets into the middle of the competition, he will win the dual meet. So if you're worried, oh, well, Penn State doesn't have an answer at 197, or they're going to drop a couple dual meets at that one weight class, that's not an issue at all. What you need to focus on is making sure that Josh Barr gets healthy. Connor Mirasola, if he were to go in the lineup at 197, just speaking in terms of hypotheticals, because I don't want to say that, oh, Barr can't go or that he won't. I imagine that Barr will be ready to go for the postseason based on what we've discussed and I've heard initially thus far. But if Connor Mirasola had to be the representative at 197, he would absolutely factor in as a title contender right out of the gate. He wouldn't be the favorite, but he'd certainly be in that top 4 alongside Elam, Novak, and Little, and Max Stout. I'll give Max Stout credit where credit's due there. So that's pretty impressive for someone who's going into a second season, redshirt freshman. Penn State very well might have the top 10. Maybe I'm not giving enough credit to Connor Mirasola. Penn State very well might have the top 2 wrestlers at 197 right now. They're both in State College, but only one of them can wrestle in the postseason. So obviously want to wish nothing but good health and to Josh Barr, any sort of injury that he's dealing with. And then Connor Mirasola, really eager to see him wrestle a lot more consistently here because of his potential, because of what he can do. That is a future national title contender that's sitting on the bench at the moment. So I understand why that discourse was there. And people think that maybe it's in the best interest of Connor and Cole to transfer out, but you never know when your opportunity is going to come. You never know at the end of the day. So Penn State this is why Cale Sanderson operates the way that he does. He wanted to create depth. He knows that there's 10 lineup spots there, but depth is ultra important. So if a starter has to miss time or needs some time off, you have somebody who's elite waiting and ready to go behind him as the backup. So don't forget about Lucas Cochran, because if we're going to talk about Barr and Connor Mirasola, don't forget about Cochran. We're going to talk about Shayne Van Ness as well. But Cochran, his outlook might not even be at 197 if Penn State needed him there. I'll explain why coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's show is brought to you by Game Time. College football is back. And we all couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why you got to use Game Time, the app that gives back the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. You can pull up Game Time, and in just a couple of taps, you'll see amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games for as low as $25. And if you've never used Game Time before, one of the great features about Game Time is that you can see the point of view ahead of time. If you've never been to a stadium, you've never been to a venue, and you're looking at tickets, you don't have to second guess yourself because you're going to know ahead of time what that POV looks like. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Well, if we're going to talk about Josh Barr and Connor Mirasola, we also need to talk about Lucas Cochran. Don't forget about Lucas Cochran. An important news regarding Shayne Van Ness. We're going to hit on these two wrestlers in this segment. So don't forget about Lucas Cochran. And I say that because with the injury news to Josh Barr, this was a three-man race a season ago between Barr, and now we know what Josh Barr is. He's a hammer, right? National title favorite at 197 if he's healthy and ready to go. And we imagine that he will be, right? But Connor Mirasola and Lucas Cochran all were in the mix once upon a time. And I'm here to say, don't forget about him here because he provides depth at 197. But he's also going to factor in heavyweight. And that's the interesting part of this conversation is that Cochran is that added depth that I think Penn State needs at these upper weights. Okay, especially at heavyweight. Now that Greg Kirkfleet has moved on, he's not part of the RTC. He's not part of the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club anymore. Unfortunate injury to end his Penn State career as well. He's a champ in my mind for the way that he wrestled through that leg injury and ended up finishing 6th place to get that 10 out of 10 All-Americans. But so you don't have Kirkfleet anymore, just his presence in the mat room. You don't have somebody that's really challenging Cole Mirasola, except you do. It is Lucas Cochran. Lucas Cochran is going to be either available at 197 or be up to heavyweight. He's going to be in between, but favoring that heavyweight spot because Penn State is in a good position when Josh Barr is healthy, and you have Connor Mirasola, as we have addressed, as a future national title contender at some point in time, hopefully sooner rather than later. So Cochran isn't necessarily needed at 197. But at heavyweight, yeah, you do. For depth, you don't have a backup heavyweight right now. And if Cole Mirasola, for whatever reason, is not ready, then I think Lucas Cochran should absolutely be there at heavyweight to push him, to make him better, to create some necessary competition so that it's not just a passing of the torch from Kirkfleet over to Cole Mirasola. I do believe Mirasola will be a good heavyweight in due time, though, because he's going through that transitory period where he's not going to be the biggest, the fastest, the strongest right out of the gate in a heavyweight class. Again, where you notice he does give up a size advantage. He's not as long, he's not as lengthy. He's going to be giving up some weight at the heavyweight spot, and that's pretty much the case across the board. I think other than Luke Luffman of Illinois, and Gable Steveson was obviously an exception because he was superhuman to an extent at the heavyweight class. But across the board there, you see guys like AJ Ferrari or Isaac Trumbull or Ben Keeter or Nick Feldman. They are all giving up substantial weight. They're just very athletic, bigger, stronger, heavier 197 pounders to an extent. And this is a heavyweight class where I look at that and say that Lucas Cochran and Cole Mirasola, if I had to make a prediction right now, they're fringe All-Americans. As much as I want to say, these guys can compete and guaranteed be in the spotlight for a national championship, it's hard to say that when you see what AJ Ferrari's doing over at Nebraska. Younger Bastida returns from injury for Iowa State. Guys like, again, Ben Keeter coming back from injury. Nick Feldman was injured for a lot of last season for Ohio State. That's somebody who I'm very high on going into the season. Luke Luffman gets an extra year of eligibility. This is a heavyweight class when, you had Wyatt Hendrickson, Gable Steveson vacating this group, and everybody's looking at the pie is getting sliced in every which direction. Tay Gadiali of Michigan transfers over, and he's going to be a title contender here as just a veteran. I would say that AJ Ferrari is probably the favorite here amongst all of them, just because I like his athleticism. I mean, for him to take off as much time as he did, given his personal circumstances, and for him to take third last season, impressed me a ton. But this is a heavyweight class that it is very unforgiving. I looked at this class very differently originally with, again, Steveson, Hendrickson. Okay, there is a major reset here. The top 3, 4, 5 wrestlers in this class are moving on. But then you add AJ Ferrari, you have younger Bastida, who is coming back from injury, as I've said before. And I'm not mentioning every single name, but you could. There are about, I would say, give or take 10 wrestlers here who could find themselves in the semifinal and probably expect themselves to be at that case in point. So Cole Mirasola and Lucas Cochran, we'll see if there ends up being a true battle there. If Cochran is there as depth, or if he's actually going to push Cole Mirasola for that starting heavyweight spot. I'll say this, it would not surprise me if Cochran pushes Cole Mirasola for that starting heavyweight spot, given, again, his inexperience. Mirasola has tons of talent, but there is, like I said, that adjustment period for him to go from where he was wrestling at 97 kilos to now a true heavyweight these past couple of years. And Cochran's more experience for what it's worth, right? Just total wrestling and how much time he spent at Penn State. Okay, let's talk about Shayne Van Ness, because Shayne Van Ness had news that certainly affects him here. He becomes the favorite at 149, the undisputed favorite here at 149. And that's because Caleb Henson of Virginia Tech is going to take a red shirt. That is a shocker. That is surprising. I like the move for Virginia Tech, because you can see with the momentum that they've built now, gaining commitments from Bo Bassett and Melvin Miller. And I know Miller's class of 2027, but you could have a nice punch there in the middle, a 1-2 punch there in the middle of your lineup with Bo Bassett and Caleb Henson at potentially 149 and 157. Now, I'm the furthest thing from an expert on the ins and outs of a Virginia Tech lineup, but that seems to be the idea here, is that Henson, they're going to maximize his eligibility, get him in the room the same time that Bo Bassett is starting his career as a true freshman. So this makes sense from Virginia Tech's perspective. Maximize having your best pound for pound wrestler, get him alongside Bo Bassett, and really strengthen up the middle of your lineup there. So for Shayne Van Ness, he's got to capitalize on this. If we're talking about it from Van Ness and focusing on Penn State's perspective, yeah, the expectation here is that you win a national title at 149. You are now more or less the consensus favorite. You were the consensus runner-up. You were the number 2 wrestler. All the preseason rankings had Shayne Van Ness at number 2. Because this is a 149 class that I believe is deep, but I don't look at some of these other names and say, hey, that's a guaranteed, that guy's guaranteed to get to a national title, or he's a strong contender here. I like Lachlan McNeil, transfers to Michigan, rather, from North Carolina. but that's a wrestler that Van Ness has defeated in the past. You have Ethan Styles of Ohio State, rising sophomore, up and coming. This is a guy that could be peaking at the NCAA tournament, so watch for Styles. Paniro Johnson at Iowa State, Tegan Jamison of Oklahoma State. These are all names that could factor in, but I don't group them together. I group Caleb Henson as 1A. He's the preseason favorite. And then Shayne Van Ness almost is that 1B, but there is a gap between them. I would expect Caleb Henson to defeat Shayne Van Ness in that hypothetical championship. But since now that's not the case anymore, and I'm not trying to dismiss Van Ness, I just think that Henson is the better overall wrestler in this instance. But Van Ness now has Henson out of the way because they're going to do something. Virginia Tech has long-term plans for its lineup. You're better than Lachlan McNeil on paper. You're better than Ethan Styles on paper, Paniro Johnson, Tegan Jamison, and then the rest of this 149 class is really unknown. Those are the names that I would say, you're talking about NCAA title, you're talking about NCAA championships or semifinals. Those are the names that I would put in this category, and that's going to resolve itself. We're going to see people emerge later on in the season, but right now, Shayne Van Ness is kind of all alone and is that consensus favorite. And that pressure comes with the territory. That's good for Shayne Van Ness, but the pressure is going to be on. Let's see how he handles it now as the true favorite at 149 for an NCAA title. Now let's talk about the U23 World Tournament again, because Penn State is well represented with 7 wrestlers there. 1 has already captured a gold medal. 2 are on the brink of capturing gold medals. Another 1 could medal, and then 2 others still have to go through their full respective tournaments. We're going to discuss all of that and more coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game and you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And lines are available for more than just NBA basketball. You have baseball in the postseason. You have professional football. You have college football. Lines for Penn State versus Ohio State are posted. The Buckeyes are heavy favorites in this one. 17.5 points on the spread, minus 1,200 on the money line, plus 720 if you're thinking Penn State. The total is set at 44.5. It's actually moved down last time we talked about those lines. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, now let's get to some of the other results from the U23 World Championships, because Penn State has already had 1 wrestler take home gold, 2 others competing for gold, 1 going for bronze, and then 2 others that still have to go through their full respective brackets. Remember, 7 Penn State wrestlers, very well represented at the U23 World Championships. So starting with Mitchell Mesenbrink, because he was the one that took home the gold medal already at 74 kilograms, and his gold medal match wasn't even his most impressive result. In order to get to the championship round, Mesenbrink had to defeat Aoyagi of Japan, who is a defending senior level world champion right now. That's right. For the 2025 cycle, this guy decided that, you know what, I'm not content with just a senior level gold medal. I'm going to go down to the U23 level where I still qualify, and I'm going to try to win one there too. It just shows you how tough these circuits are, whether it's U20 versus U23 or U23 versus the senior level. I know they're veterans that would absolutely dominate competition at these other age groups, but it shows how tough it is, how you can win on the senior level and then lose at the U23 level, that it's not a guarantee there. So Mesenbrink with a 7-4 buzzer beater victory, won at the buzzer against Aoyagi of Japan. And then he goes on to tech fall his opponent in the gold medal round, 12-2 over Osmus of Turkey. Mesenbrink, pretty textbook for him. right? There's not much to analyze here for Mesenbrink. He keeps this conversation fairly simple. He's going to be the resounding favorite at 165 pounds. I mean, if he's doing this again on the world circuit at the U23 level, didn't end up being the representative at the senior level because of David Carr, yes, but Mesenbrink and Carr, can't wait to see them go back and forth further as that rivalry will continue. But Penn State just has such an anchor at 165 with Mesenbrink. He brings home gold at U23, just continues to dominate. His offense leads the way. But then again, even still, like I said, the most impressive victory here was in the semifinal, knocking off a defending senior level world champion. And then we go to Levi Haines and Luke Lilledahl. Okay, we should start with Lilledahl, actually, because he's at 57 kilos, and then we work our way up to 79 kilos. Lilledahl here, humbled a little bit at the senior level, right? And that's to be expected. Okay, Spencer Lee was very close to bringing home an Olympic medal. Did not do what he was supposed to do at the senior level for this world tournament. That's okay. Lilledahl there continues. I really do believe, and I saw that when they were going, when it was Spencer Lee versus Luke Lilledahl, you could just see the gap continue to close. And then when Lilledahl wrestles down at the U23 level, or when he wrestles in that age group, you can see just how much better he is. Okay. You see that at the senior level, hey, okay, you're not quite there yet, but at U23, you're one of the best here. So an impressive run all the way through, 10-0 in the round of 16, 11-5 in the quarterfinals, 7-1 in the semifinals, just continued decisive victories here. He's going to face Kikuchi of Japan and hopefully bring home another gold medal here to join Mitchell Mesenbrink as another Penn State wrestler here. And it just shows Lilledahl should be expected. Now, Lilledahl, I think his preference is obviously freestyle, but you will see him be a national title contender again at folk style. He was going into this recent NCAA tournament for this past season. He will definitely be that will definitely be the case in 2026. I know that Robinson of NC State is the defending champion at 125, but it's hard not to say that with what Lilledahl does in the offseason adds to the resume and adds to his argument why he should honestly be the favorite at 125 going into the next NCAA season. And then for Levi Haines, Levi Haines continues. He hasn't been wrestling freestyle for as long as you would think so, based on watching his matches. Okay, this was something that he really invested time in when he got to Penn State. And now this guy is representing on the senior level, is at the U23 age group, and he's in the final. So he ultimately did not win. He took silver. Hey, that's nothing to bat an eye at when it comes to the senior level here. But watching Haines just be efficient, he's just the more powerful wrestler. He's the more conditioned wrestler. And in that semifinals bout against Dowdov of Russia, and forgive me if I'm butchering any of the names from the international wrestlers, but Haines to just stay composed, stay poised, because Dowdov of Russia just kept pushing him, was calling for injury timeouts, and dude, just own it. Okay. If you miss that bout where Haines ends up winning in the semis 11-4, he was just better than you. Okay. Haines was able to push the pace. His opponent just didn't look conditioned at the end of the day. So he is going for gold here at 79 kilos. And then PJ Duke, it is a little disappointing because of the run he went on at the senior level locally, right? Nationally in the United States, knocking off Yianni Diakomihalis, knocking off two defending NCAA champions from Nebraska in the process. And then at the senior level for the world championships, humbled. Okay, he's 19. This is to be somewhat expected that he's not going to be peaking every single day. And then he wins gold at U20. Okay. But then you're not always going to have your best result at every single match. But that's where Duke is, that this doesn't happen often. And it's surprising to see him lose via tech fall. He got turned a few times. He gave up. It was an 8-point swing. He was up 2-0 against Haybatov. And He ended up giving up an 8-point swing, challenged it, and you could kind of just see the morale go a little bit. And he had to push the pace to try to get back, and he just couldn't. He did get a takedown, though, but ultimately 14-4 was the final result. He's going to go for bronze there. Still extremely impressive. True freshman at Penn State, taking home potentially a U23 medal to add to a U20 gold, and then representing the United States on the senior level as a 19-year-old true freshman for Penn State. So Duke has a lot to be proud of there, just because, again, not every result's going to go your way. It was literally a turn of events for him in that semifinals bout. Sometimes you just don't have it, or sometimes a challenge doesn't go your way, and the momentum just shifts from there. Then remember, Marcus Blaze is going to go at 65 kilos, and Rocco Welsh at 86 kilos, with 7 Penn State wrestlers in total that are at the U23 tournament. So we'll have updates and results for those as well as we continue to follow along. My name is Zach Seyko. I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. As always, thank you so much for joining me on this edition to talk some Penn State wrestling. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Which wrestlers have impressed you the most? What storylines you're eager to follow when it comes to this Penn State wrestling lineup? Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss any conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams as we talk about all of it. Penn State wrestling, football, recruiting, basketball, hockey, you name it, it is all right here on Locked On Nittany Lions every single day.